G'day, mites, and welcome to tonight's special edition of Aussie News, broadcast to you from all around the Big Island. I am in front of the Sydney Opera House, pride of the arts in Australia. From this angle, I am clearly in the harbor. Let me get my floaty. Tonight, we will be going out into the field with our reporters to give you first-hand knowledge with special reports of Australian culture and an interview from a recently relocated family. As reporters, we dive into the nitty-gritty of our segments. By deep research, we gain information and insight into the culture of Australia. Perhaps you are visiting relos or mates, attending our uni, or planning on relocating to our island. We will be guiding you to an understanding of Australia's culture. Tonight's features will be covering vital statistics, an outsider's point of view, our dominant culture patterns, the rites of initiation and how to become a member of an Aussie group, how Aussies feel about stereotypes, our language style, gestures, and what not to do, and those pesky poisonous animals, and how we celebrate our lifestyle in our spare time. Most importantly, we will be answering that question: do Aussie toilets really flush the opposite direction? We'll take our broadcast now over to Leah Gray, who will be discussing the vital statistics of Australia. Thank you, Leah.
Hey, Joe. Australia is a wonderfully diverse continent, rich with natural resources and industry. There are several major industries that make up the economy of Australia: agriculture, such as wool, mining of metals, minerals, and coal. Due to the arid climate, major crop farming isn't sustainable. With overall annual precipitation between less than 10 to 20 inches, farmers cannot feasibly sustain massive crop production like other countries, such as the United States. Without major industry like farming, people in rural areas have very limited options for earning income. The Australian Council of Social Services released a report in 2020 on poverty in Australia. Poverty, as defined by Scott McLean in the textbook Exploring Intercultural Communication, is when a person or group of people lack human needs because they cannot afford them. The cost of living in Australia, according to Wise.com, is the 16th highest cost of living in the world. The site reports that the cost of a one-bedroom flat in the city centre of Sydney is around Australian dollars 2,649 per month. In Perth, the same flat is around 1,430 Australian dollars. Total monthly living expenses per person in Sydney are around 1,430 Australian dollars as well, without rent included. With this in mind, let's take a look at some recent data regarding poverty, especially in the greater affected Indigenous people of Australia. Of the nearly 25.7 million people of Australia, there are 3.24 million, or 13.6%, living below the poverty line, which is 50% of the median income. And this includes 774,000 children, or 17.7%, and 424,800 young people. Among different family types, sole parent families have the highest poverty rates at 35%. Children in sole parent families with a poverty rate of 44% are more than 3 times as likely to live in poverty as children in coupled families, who have a poverty rate of only 13%. For the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the rate of poverty is twice as high as in very remote communities as compared to rates in major cities. The percent of people in poverty in these areas are 54% and 24% respectively. Where there is wealth and poverty, we also see health disparity. The difference between who has access to healthcare services and who does not is very apparent in Australia. Discrimination based on race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and other factors can play a role in the cause behind a person or people being set at a disadvantage. People who suffer from poverty are likely to lack fulfillment of basic human needs, which further drives the cycle of poverty and health disparity. The Australian Institute of Health and Welfare released a report that gives us insight into the health disparity of the Indigenous people of Australia. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are at a disadvantage socioeconomically and experience health inequality. There has been improvement in some areas. Data in the report shows that the child mortality rate among the two people groups have dropped from 217 to 146 per 100,000 between 1998 and 2016. However, the rate of child mortality in non-Indigenous children in 2016 was 74, according to Statista.com. Indigenous Australians have lower levels of education, income, poorer quality housing. They also have higher rates of alcohol consumption and smoking on average, as well as lower rates of exercise than non-Indigenous Australians. Non-Indigenous people typically have an easier time accessing nearby affordable health services than do Indigenous Australians. And with higher rates of poverty, Indigenous people are less likely to be able to afford to travel or have transportation to healthcare services. So they are at a higher rate of disparity. Social wellness factors in to overall health of Australians. The concept of social wellness for Indigenous Australians is deeply rooted in spiritual and mental wellness. Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders believe that connection to spirit, mind, and country are very closely linked, and this is a factor that many healthcare professionals are recognizing and taking into consideration when treating Indigenous patients. This lends to the improvement in overall healthcare for Indigenous people. McLean states that social wellness is acting in harmony with nature, family, and others in the community. A recent poll by the Lowy Institute shows that 70% of people want the government to do something more to fight climate change. This is an important factor to Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians and will have an impact on the overall health of their culture and society. Understanding how a culture's economy functions and how people live, struggle, and thrive is an important foundation to understanding a culture. Now, let's learn more about Australia from a first-hand perspective. Chelsea has a special guest for us.
Thank you, Leah. That was incredibly informative. I would like to introduce the lovely Rachel. Rachel is originally from the United States and moved to Australia 2 years ago. Now that she's acclimated and learned the culture, she agreed to be a part of this interview and give us a little bit of insight on the Australian everyday. So my first question is, as an American, I always hear about how big of a problem the animals are in Australia. Have you had any experiences with them yet?
When I've seen in wildlife, the animals here, it's mostly been because I went to go see the animals here. We did a tour up north. We saw drop bears. We saw kangaroos. It was great. The kids had a great time. But it's not like I wake up to huntsman spiders making brekkie in my kitchen every day.
Oh my gosh, that sounds absolutely terrifying.
I think it would be.
So no pythons in your toilets then?
Not so far, knock on wood.
Well, that's good to hear. So my next question is, Australians are known in America as pretty rambunctious people. How frequently do Australians cuss on a daily basis?
It's not cussing here, it's swears, but pretty fucking often.
Okay, well that sounds like my kind of place. So my next question, I read in an article that nudity and unisex bathrooms are a pretty normal thing in Australia. Is this true?
Yeah, it is true. And, you still have your stalls where you go do your business and stalls to shower in. So you do still have your privacy, but it is definitely different from the States because you just go in and you change and there might be anybody else there, but it gets to not be a big deal the longer you're in that culture. It's shocking at first and then you kind of acclimate and it becomes like anything else. It becomes your normal.
Okay, yeah, I do imagine that at first that would have been very startling. All right, well, your family is waiting for you at Bondi, aren't they?
Yes, that's what this is for.
Perfect. Well, we will let you get back to them. Thank you so much for enlightening us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right, next we have Cassie with a segment on dominant culture patterns.
Nice to meet you, I'm Cassie. When meeting someone for the first time in Australia, make sure and shake their hands and look them in the eyes. I was just about to go for a walk with my dog. Did you want to join me? Great. Let me just grab my thongs. For those of you still learning the lingo, thongs are flip-flops. Let's go. Australians rank high on the individualism scale and are more likely to rely on direct family and mates than anyone else. Relationships are built on mutual respect, and nothing is asked of someone that you're not willing to do yourself. It's not uncommon to live out in the whoop whoop or in the middle of nowhere and only see your neighbors as they're driving into town to go get more stubbies and durries. Stubbies and durries are referring to alcohol and cigarettes. There they go. Hey, pick me up a goon bag while you're in town. Thank you. Sorry about that. This carries over to the low power distance and class difference that is displayed in the overall culture. If hierarchy is established, there's usually a level of accessibility, and employees and teams are consulted for their expertise. Communication flows seamlessly in all directions and not just from the top down. For those who do choose to demonstrate superiority, the tall poppy gets cut down ideology is applied. I just left a meeting with my poppy. He thinks he's so much better than the rest of us just because he's the boss. I mean, I'm always flat out like a lizard drinking. I'm going to have to check a sickie tomorrow just to show him. The poppy gets cut down is the idea in which Australians choose to not stand out. It is preferred to go unnoticed or to not take credit for a job well done. Those that do stand out, like my boss that I just made in reference to, might be targeted to be sabotaged or simply not accepted in society. Translation for I'm always flat out like a lizard drinking, I'm always working hard and I'm very busy. And to check a sickie is I'm gonna call in sick. Life is for living, not for working is a common idea in Australia. So it's not uncommon for employees to take a day off or a sickie just to relax. The culture is considered an egalitarian, where it's believed that everyone should have a fair go. This is largely due to the increase of immigrants applying for citizenship. I mean, I just applied for citizenship and was surprised when they asked me if I had been convicted of any crimes. I had no idea that was still a requirement. Oh look, there goes a mob of kangaroos. Did you get it? Oh man, that was amazing, you just missed it. Communication is considered to be low context, where no background is assumed. So you say what you mean, no need to read in between the lines. That doesn't always mean that it's easy to understand. Take, for example, yeah, nah means no. Nah, yeah means yes. Or she'll be apples. What? This actually means she'll be all right. As you've probably noticed, the communication is informal, direct, restrained, and if humor is involved, it's often dry. Now, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go find a nice place to watch the sunset.
Thanks for the info, Cassie. I feel like I know so much more about the dominant culture patterns that are present in Australia. Some of the concepts from Chapter 3 that I will explore and discuss in Australian culture are the rites of initiation, stereotypes, and individualism. Before we can explore some of the rites of initiation that are present in Australia, we need to understand what the rites of initiation are. Rites of initiation mark the transition of the role or status of an individual within a group. Some of the examples in America are getting your driver's license, being able to drink, and voting. Some of these initiations are highly formal, while others are informal. An informal example would be getting hazed before one can become part of a frat, while a formal rite of passage would be receiving a bachelor's degree even if it took an extra year because of all the parties. There are many cultures with many different rites of initiation, and these cultures can be found in business, religion, and families, to name a few. But what are some of the rites of initiation that are present in Australian culture? While there are many cultures present in Australia, and I won't be able to focus on all of them, I wanted to focus on the rite of initiation present in the Aborigine culture, which is still present today. This rite of initiation is called Bora. In Aborigine culture, this ritual is to teach the young boys of the tribe information about the law, their country, and their spiritual beliefs. These ceremonies usually take place over different periods of time. These young adults usually need to prove themselves to be recognized by the tribe. A sign that the young member has completed, or as a sign that a young member has completed all that is required for initiation, a graduation is held. At the ceremony, the boy will participate in a dance during which an elder will spit ochre over his hand of the over the hand of the initiated. The formal would be a Kurabora party, where everyone dances, and it usually goes all night long. Most of these ceremonies take place inside of a bora ring, and these rings are often made by carrying sand a very long way to create a deep circle to dance on. The next thing I wanted to talk about is some of the stereotypes that the media uses to quickly label Australian culture and why they are dangerous. Stereotypes can be defined as generalizations about a group of people that oversimplify their culture, traits, or characteristics. One stereotype that people label Australian culture with is that most of the population, excluding the Aborigine people, of course, is descended from British convicts. From January 1788, when the first fleet of convicts arrived at Botany Bay, to the end of the convict transportation 8 years later, over 160,000 convicts were transported to Australia. Currently, it is estimated that around 20% of the Australian population are descended from people originally transported as convicts. As seen, the stereotype is wrong, and the majority of the population are actually European or Asian. Stereotypes like these can strip the individuals of their identities and give others a false sense of knowledge that can hinder communication between cultures. A majority of Australia is individualistic. In short, an individualist cultures value individual freedom and personal independence. And Australian culture tends to lean towards more of a masculine approach in terms of success. This indicates that the society will be driven by competition, achievement, and success, with success being defined as the winner or the best in field. This value system starts in school and continues throughout one's life, both in work and leisure pursuits. A good example of some of the media that portrays this, and that's present in Australian culture, is the movie Crocodile Dundee. This movie is about a character named Dundee who is the definition of a masculine, independent Australian. And even though there are quite a few stereotypes in the movie, it was still one of the highest grossing films in Australia. Most cultures always have stories to reflect their values, and this is definitely one of the movies that does this. So give it a watch.
Thank you, Patrick, for sharing on the rites of initiation, stereotypes, and individualism in Australian culture. I'm going to take us to a slightly more difficult topic to discuss: racism, ethnocentrism, and stereotypes, beginning with racism. Until recently, there were little studies on racism in Australia, and even after the implementation of various programs to promote diversity and cultural awareness, the follow-through of understanding the results or from these programs, if there was a change or if it had any kind of impact, was never done. So according to the Australian Human Rights Commissions, 20% of Australians have experienced some form of discrimination in the past 12 months. This could be racial, or it could also be religious. The Essential Vision poll reports that 49% of the population support a ban on Muslim immigration. 5% claim that they have been attacked because of their race, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders tend to be the largest group targeted for discrimination, going all the way back to the arrival of the British with the declaration of terra nullius, or unowned land, or no man's land. basically removing ownership of the land from the First Nation people because of their belief of superiority or ethnocentrism on behalf of the British. According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, ethnocentrism is the attitude that one's own group, ethnicity, or nationality is superior to others. As Patrick indicated, stereotypes are generalizations about a group of people, and they don't tend to be very positive. So, still today, there are stereotypes that surround the First Nation people of hopelessness, alcoholism, illiteracy, and the inability to maintain themselves without help from others. As an attempt to rectify past damages and improvements have been made to help support the more vulnerable groups, such as the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders mental health programs, Australians Nurse Family Partnership, which supports new mums as of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander babies. And then there's also the Connected Beginnings, which prepares children for school and aims to bridge the gap of readiness between First Nation children and non-Indigenous children. Even though these programs are in place, the life expectancy of the First Nation people is 10 years less than a non-Indigenous person. And the imprisonment rate is 15 times greater. Because this is a class on intercultural communication, it's also important to understand that there might be terms that are considered inappropriate. In this case, Indigenous is considered a term used by the colonists and is regarded as insensitive as it generalizes the cultures. Full blood, half blood, and their acronyms are considered offensive and should never be used to address a First Nation person. With this being said, a large percentage of the population of Australia prides itself on being a successful multicultural country, with a significant percentage of its residents having been born overseas. According to the 2020 census, that's actually 29.8% that were born overseas. The largest group of immigrants are from the UK, New Zealand, China, India, and Vietnam. 76% of the population considers themselves to be part Aussie. Australians have begun to redefine themselves as being multicultural and a multi-faith country. Self-perception or self-image for Australia is the Aussie modesty. In general, Australian culture is considered modest, which makes sense, right? Aussie modesty, with humility and authenticity being the strongest values in the Australian culture. They also value sincerity, humor, and informality. This trait is directly related to how they also perceive others. Perception, according to our book, is the action of becoming aware and making sense of things through our senses. So, sight. Good eye contact is perceived as in non-Aboriginal Australian culture is being seen as sincere, trustworthy, and approachable. For the Aboriginal culture, it's actually considered disrespectful and confrontational. So you just need to be a little bit aware on that part. Space could be interpreted as your personal space, or it could also be considered as to reflect power or status. So for Australians, personal space is appreciated, and a person's bubble tends to be about the length of an arm. Waiting your turn in line is expected, and cutting is extremely rude. Bedrooms are considered personal space and should not be entered unless you are invited to do so. Physical contact, so touch, in the culture is with regards to whether the cultures accept people being touched or they prefer to not be touched. So for Australian, physical contact is expected in the forms of a handshake when greeting or saying goodbye. Women may kiss on the cheek or hug depending on their familiarity, but touching is not very common during conversations. Couples, however, are considered to be okay to maintain contact, even in public areas, within reason. keeping in mind the modest self-perception of the Australian people, that the Australian people have of themselves, and applying this to one's own personality helps ensure a smoother interaction while visiting their country. So with that, ho ro, which is a pretty old-fashioned way of saying see you later, and off to Mary Jo for a much lighter view on Australian culture and communication.
Thank you, Cassie, for that wonderful information. I'm going to talk to you about the language of Australia. Great news! If you speak English, you're going to have an easier time communicating in Australia, as English is the primary language, both written and verbal. However, it has been adapted from the original British English to a more abbreviated form. British English was the first form used in Australia when it was settled in 1788. The English language was influenced by multiple dialects during the colonization as a penal colony. Yes, convicts. Kel Richards talks about the first settlers who came on 11 ships from British territories. Out of necessity, dialect leveling needed to occur to adapt the dialects to form better communication between the first settlers, but in doing so, lost many of the original dialects. The elocution era in 1890 ambushed the dialects and removed many of them. Elocution teachers were brought in to teach children proper pronunciation of vowel sounds and not allowing the use of en for ing and short vowel a for er and ar. Examples of this would be fishin and fishing and wada and water. According to Erickson, modern linguists categorize 3 different accents used in Australia: broad, general, and cultivated. Broad Australian accents refer to the most furthest removed from the original British accent with an ochre sound, meaning rough and uncultivated. An example of this would be your stereotypical Australian movies such as Crocodile Dundee. General Australian accent refers to the everyday accent within the common areas of Australia, mainly referring to the acceptable use of abbreviated words, slang, and cussing. Cultivated Australian is the closest to the original British accent, with very little ochre sound and use of slang and abbreviated language minimally. Abbreviated words and slang, what am I referring to? Australian language has many slang terms. For example, crook meaning thief, boned meaning arrested, and floored meaning so drunk you can't get up. Many of the phrases and words used today were created by the convicts. James Hardy Vow, a famous convict and author, termed these words flash language. His favorite phrase was "ya lushy cove," meaning you drunk man. Shortened words, especially overcomplicated ones, are for efficiency, representing the laid-back culture of Australia. Aussies like to talk, but they prefer to have short conversations. For example, uni and university, or ambo and ambulance. Don't be surprised if cussing, joking, and sarcasm will be used frequently in conversation. Do not take offense to this. Oh, I am getting word that we have breaking news from the Today Show. Let's take a listen.
Oh, well, it's really quite funny. I was in bed sleeping at 2 o'clock this morning. My wife comes in and says, "Oh, the shop's been, someone ran into the shop." And I said, "Oh, what?" So I jumped out of bed and all I had was my undies on, and I walked out the front and I was seeing the car smashed, and I seen the bloke walking back to the car. And so I walked outside and I said, oh, what are you doing, mate? Like, you can't be leaving the scene. And he goes, don't be a hero, mate. And I said, I'm not trying to be a hero, but the police are coming. And he just decided he'd scoot up the road, and I just said, nah, it's not going on like that, mate. So I jumped in my car, and I started chasing him up the road, and then he went down a side street, and then the police were coming, and I flashed them and set them off in the direction of him. But, mate, all I had was my jocks on, and I was chasing him up the street, and I'm just like, mate, like...
Because you told me that this is your mate's shop,
Yeah.
and you didn't want him to get away.
Yeah, well, me mate's mum's had this shop for like 40 odd years, and look at it. Well,
It's a mess, isn't it?
beyond a mess. Oh, like, words can't explain how it is, mate. Like,
Now, Daniel, you managed to put some pants on in the meantime.
yeah, mate.
It's good to hear. Do you feel like a hero?
Not really. It's just something you got to do for the community, mate. It's like you look after your mates, and your mates will always look after you.
There you go. Good attitude. There you go, guys. Daniel, quite the Australian hero here this morning. As for the owners of the fish and chip shop, well, they are insured, but there is a big mess to clean up this morning.
Well, that was a great example of broad and cultivated Australian accents. Let's briefly talk about the Aboriginal language, which is hard to study as it was not documented well. Said to have over 300 languages when Australia was first settled, the Aboriginal languages has since dwindled and been lost over generations. Bob Holman stated, the 25 Aboriginal languages still being passed to new generations make up one of the last and most diverse hunter-gatherer linguist groups left. Aboriginal writing uses symbols to represent words. Petroglyphs, also called rock art, are recorded all over the continent of Australia. Aboriginals also use many instruments, some to communicate connections with nature, such as the didgeridoo, and some to communicate over distances, such as the bull roarer. Let's take a look at that in action. Well, that shortened the conversation. Now we've learned a bit about the language. We will take this over to Chelsea, who will be discussing Australia's nonverbal behaviors and norms. Thank you.
Who knew Australian English had such a rich history? Tone of voice, hand gestures, facial expressions, fashion and beauty standards are all important things to consider when trying to show people who you are. What do these look like for an Australian? Do Australians really wear safari hats and cargo pants? Do they all sport outlandishly good looks and an attitude? In this segment, we will address all of these questions and more. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or at least that's what people tell me. According to Tourism and Australian Beach Cultures Revealing Bodies by Christine Metusela and Gordon Waite, Australians are very comfortable with showing their bodies in unisex bathrooms and on the beach. Here in the United States of America, the idea of same-sex or communal bathrooms was a shock and is still a topic of much controversy. However, in Australia, being in a public bathroom that allows both sexes is not an unusual thing. Many public restrooms at parks and beaches are same-sex. They have private shower stalls and toilet stalls to remain decent. It is considered a culturally normal thing, and most locals don't seem to understand people from other countries having an issue with it. Speaking of boundaries, being semi-nude on the beach is a pretty normal thing. Many locals and tourists go to the beach on a regular basis and sport the topless look, while not even batting an eye. The locals will show an opposite side more frequently in their day-to-day dress, however. Biopsies conducted by physicians of possible melanomas in a study done of 1,200 Aussies is up by 16% between the year 2005 and 2015. The locals are aware of the rising skin cancer issues and tell the tourists the number one thing not to do in Australia is to underestimate the sun. The sun shirt, large hats, and plenty of sunscreen are fast becoming staples in an Aussie's closet. Australians are notorious for drinking and partying. Their body language, however, is usually quite the opposite. In fact, many Australians have very similar body language to that of Americans. In Australia, the main no-no hand gestures are flipping someone the middle finger, done like so, and the peace sign with the additional thumb and fingers pointed at yourself. These both mean about the same thing and are generally frowned upon. Body language to include is eye contact, which demonstrates sincerity and authenticity. Shaking hands is also a common nonverbal greeting, though more casual or intimate greetings can include the back slap and/or a hug or kiss on the cheek. Additional etiquette would include what is known as the thank you wave or the one finger wave, not to be confused with flipping someone the middle finger. While driving and in acknowledgement of someone going out of their way to be polite while in traffic. Australians are very into body image, and it is not uncommon for women or men to get plastic surgeries to achieve these goals. According to the Sydney Morning Herald and the article Military Get Plastic Surgery on Breasts by Daniel Cronin, taxpayers in Australia pay about $211,000 a year so that members of their military can get plastic surgery. The procedures covered include reconstruction, post-cancer or tumor removal for anyone battling cancer, breast reduction, and breast augmentation. Natural-looking, athletic, symmetrical bodies are the most desired body image. Being physically fit is highly revered, and many Australians take part in outdoor play and exercise on a regular basis. On to Jeremy, who will be telling us about the Australian lifestyle.
Thank you for that information, Chelsea. For a better experience, let's hope that these can be remembered if you're ever in Australia. Moving on from there, let's look at the work week in Australia. So, even though Australia might give off the vibe of a laid-back place where people just hang out with kangaroos on the beach, you will find that's not quite the case. A typical work week in Australia is considered 38 hours, and though it's typically shorter or slightly shorter than a U.S. work week, you may not find that it comes with a more relaxed atmosphere. Australians typically work very long hours, and they take work very seriously. Showing up late to meetings is something that is very frowned upon within the Australian work culture. So the working conditions, as described by the Journal of Industrial Relations, puts a high aspect on working flexibility due to realizing the interference that comes up with the work-life balance. To cope with this, the demanding work-life balance brought about the Fair Work Act of 2009, and that includes the right to request. And this gives the employees the option to request time off, which is also encouraged without threat to their job. So while this does not automatically mean the request is approved, it does give them more room for the employee to work with and give them more options to escape from work if need be. The Fair Work Act isn't the only good mention of the Australian work life, however. So under the Australian federal law, workers are guaranteed 20 hours of paid vacation, as well as 7 paid holidays. These days are typically taken in lump sum by the employees, and they are free to take them all at once and usually do. So honestly, to me, this is sounding more and more like an enticing place to live. So on the opposite side of the work life, we have leisure activities. So some leisure activities that are found in Australia, of course, are going to be water sports. And as a lover of water sports myself and water in general, I feel like this should be my second home. So if you ever wanted to fly on water, they have aqua jetpack flying. If you ever wanted to learn how to ride a tunnel like the pro surfers, they have surfing lessons. If you would like to travel underwater like the spies do in movies, they have underwater scooter tours. And honestly, I feel like more places should offer these activities. And that's just in my opinion, of course. But for now, one stop place where you can go and do all of these things is Australia. Aside from water activities, there are a slew of attractions and memories that can be made there. The top attraction is known as the Gone. This is a luxurious train that will take you across Australia while stopping for various tour spots. If you're not up to movements and would rather just hang out with some furry friends, you have the option to spend some time with the kangaroos on the sandy beach of Lucky Bay. This isn't anywhere near the end of the list of attractions and leisure activities that Australians have at their fingertips, but after all the talk of activities, of course the next stop is food. Who doesn't love food? Show me a person who doesn't love food and I'll show you a liar. By the end of the 19th century, Australia has had an established agricultural system and food processing industry, making them a net exporter of food. And since then, they have only improved on this part of their culture. Unfortunately, the forward progress made is mainly only found and seen within Australia, so you're not likely to have had any Australian dishes if you are not from there. Since the cuisine typically uses ingredients that are mainly found in Australia, such as kangaroo or the Roselia fruit, Australia cuisine has been pretty much landlocked to some extent. With that being the case, if you are ever visiting Australia, you are sure to find something that is out of the norm. Although it is mentioned that kangaroo is used in dishes, it is done so with reluctance since it is their national emblem. Kangaroos are viewed in a spiritual and cultural light, as well as with a social significance to Indigenous Australia. Even so, it is touted as being better than beef or lamb, and it sounds crazy, especially if you think of that cute little animal. But these are testaments from the locals, so who am I to reject it? Kangaroo meat is a lean meat with less than 2% fat. It is rich in other essential vitamins and minerals. And if you are ever, eating wild meat such as kangaroo, you can be sure that there are no added growth hormones or antibiotics or chemicals that would have altered the meat. If you're wanting to relax after a fun-filled and active day, there are plenty of routes to take. For Australia, a popular attraction, of course, is the Sydney Opera House. You may or may not know that this amazing masterpiece is the result of a competition to give Australia a new music and performance center. The winner of that competition was Bjorn Utzon, with this creation of the now world-known Sydney Opera House. With this being a main attraction of Australia, you can probably guess what a popular music genre is that they listen to. That would be opera and orchestra, among other popular genres such as traditional, contemporary, blues, country, and jazz. There are also plenty of world-class musicians that have come out of Australia. To name a few, Sia, Keith Urban, Iggy Azalea, AC/DC, the Bee Gees, and so much more. Australian music reaches millions of people, both local and abroad. Music contributes significantly to the Australian economy and is a billion-dollar national industry for them. This generates thousands of jobs in the live retail and recording sectors in Australia. And so if you're ever possibly looking for a change in your job and you can sing or are interested in anything music related, that would be a good place to go. And now with that, let's go over to Patrick.
Thank you, Jeremy. Sounds like the Australian lifestyle is pretty modern. In some aspects can even be compared to America. Of course, without many of the dangerous animals, which brings me to my next topic, which are the poisonous animals that live in Australia and if they actually affect the people who live there. One deadly animal that leaves no victims is the inland taipan. This snake is in fact one of the most poisonous snakes in the world. The potency of their venom allows the species to knock out prey quickly. Tapians usually feed on the world's toughest rodents that could severely injure or kill any other snake. And they contain enough venom to kill several adults. The equally dangerous Sydney funnel-web spider is also extremely venomous. The difference is their venom is primarily used for defense. As a fluke, we are particularly sensitive to funnel-web venom, and thus bites are particularly devastating to humans. However, there hasn't been a death since the development of anti-venom. Surprisingly, the European honeybee is more dangerous than the funnel-web spider. It's not because it's more venomous, but because of the allergic reactions suffered by 1 to 2% of the population, coupled with the high incidence of bee stings, and this makes them second to snakes as the most deadly venomous animal in Australia. These are just a few of a wide variety of dangerous animals that Australians have to live with every day. However, does the presence of these animals affect daily life? The short answer is it really doesn't. Most of the populations live in cities, and a lot of the time, many of these animals avoid urban areas. Although, bugs and spiders still occasionally show up in people's homes, which is definitely something that would take some getting used to. It's pretty average for people in America to get small spiders in their homes, but in Australia one can run into huge cockroaches and huntsman spiders that are basically the size of a baseball. And that's absolutely terrifying. But they're actually quite harmless. And sometimes venomous spiders do wander into homes, but they're usually reclusive, so many Australians have to be careful if they reach their hand in a dark crevice, and they need to make sure that there's no venomous spiders. Overall though, a good percentage of animals and insects that live in Australia are dangerous. They are still part of a unique ecosystem that is only found in Australia.
Thank you for that information, Patrick. We will have to keep this in mind when and if we ever find ourselves in Australia. Well, that brings us to a close on this trip to Australia. Let's review some, shall we? Australians speak English, but those accents can cause some problems when communicating. This is not to say it is impossible, but a keen ear will be needed at some point. While Australia is known for multiple industries that make up its economy, poverty is quite common in Australia, such as it is in the U.S., and due to this, there is a clear health disparity as a result. Even though this is the case, Australians are a vibrant people who put value on their people earning what is theirs. They believe in paying a fair wage and everyone having the same opportunities. They show this with their high ranking on the individualism scale while still relying on families and mates more than anyone else. With plenty of rites of initiation ranging from voting to Bora, Australia is rich in culture and yearns to keep the values going by passing knowledge on to the younger generation when the time is right, teaching them about laws, their country, and spiritual beliefs, while instilling their individualistic culture at the same time. This, however, was not always the case for Australia. There have been periods where racial and religious differences were a large part of their culture. However, now you will find that Australia prides itself on being a successful multicultural country. If you do find yourself in Australia, make sure you are aware of those nonverbal communications that should be avoided or adhered to, such as the middle finger or the peace sign. Either one of those? I don't think so. So, other than that, the work environment is quite serious, but there are plenty of attractions and laws in place to take the burden of that away from its employees. This ranges from the right to request as well as federal laws that ensure those amazing vacation days and that the employees will have. Last and not least, watch out for those poisonous animals. Although, as stated by our lovely guest Rachel, that they are not as rampant as one might think, it will still pay off to be safe and alert. Thank you. That's all.